Okay, the last white is Rocinante. Maybe
Yes.
begin with the name, perhaps.
Yeah, it's Rocinante. Rocinante is named after an old Spanish novel of Don Quixote. And in that novel, there's a demented guy who believes in his old donkey that stands outside to be his noble steed. The only thing he sees is the noblest steed of all steeds he's ever known. So everyone else see it for what it is. It's a donkey, very old, neglected almost, and lost his teeth. But Don Quixote saddles it up as his noble steed. And he calls it Rocinante. It means the strongest horse from the front. That pulls the carriage in the front as well. For me, there's 3 noble white varieties in the Cape, especially for granite and sustainably for our temperature or climate conditions and our soils. And that's Chenin Blanc, Grenache Blanc and Roussanne. I think these have really the ability to manage our conditions well and drought as well, and also gain ample acidities and texture and flavor compounds that I enjoy in white wines. So combining them has always been an experiment in the back of the cellar. 2021 was the first vintage when I labeled it, but the 4 prior vintages I've already been working on it. I'm quite happy with the approach. In the end is to look at these 3 varieties that in the Cape they ripen quite closely together, especially on granite. So here we have Chenin, old vines from the Helderberg, decomposed granite, and then we have our sandier and sandstone granite from the Voor-Paardeberg Grenache Blanc, and then a little bit of coffee clip mid-slow Voor-Paardeberg Roussanne. So these 3 ripen together on the same day for my palate. And I picked these all three the same morning, and they are co-crushed or co-treated as grapes together from the start. So essentially neglecting variety and just focusing on these 3 varieties of vineyards that make berries, and it's ripe at the same time, collect them as a field blend. Soak them on the skins quite quickly for 1 day prior to pressing, and then ferments in old barrels and kept on the fine lees and bottled after 9 months. It's again a pure take, but here for me the Roussanne plays a big role, and it brings a lot of nice binding, almost oily beeswax notes with the Chenin, and also that broad palate of the Grenache Blanc, and it binds into a super complex kind of style food white wine for me, and it's a style of white wine that I endure. Maybe demented to believe it's my 3 noble white varieties, but that's Rocinante.
And tell me quickly, oxidative winemaking and reductive winemaking here, there seems to be a little bit of a...
Up and down. So it's a kind of death and resurrection, as sometimes with the Grenache Blanc. But yeah, carefully at certain phases to allow some oxygen to be part, and then again closing it back up and make sure that it stays fresh. So that's important. So yeah, there is a fine balance between the 2.
Yeah, it's got a nice linen woolly element to it.
Yeah.
I think would be amazing because it just sits broadly in your palate. It just lies there. It's seafood. One's seafood, one's food in the palate.
Yeah. When I first tasted it, I thought it may have had some marcin in it because of that sort of waxy,
Really waxy texture.
Yeah,
apple wax.
really interesting. But I think the Roussanne today is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, especially on the nose. That sort of exotic floral component which you don't often see in Chenin or Grenache, but once it's on the palate, you see that structural elements come through, and those acidities come through, and that lovely minerality on the finish. It's quite an expressive wine. It's probably the most expressive of the whites. Do you think that's because it's, obviously the Chromatulus is schist, the Venetian is older, whereas this is sort of just quote unquote younger vines, but also off lighter soils, or?
Yeah, I mean this is also now a blend. So the game is the making wine from 3 vineyards is a lot different than it is with just one. Where the challenges are to work with what you have there, and combining 3 vineyards and all 3 elements. And finding a balance between those 3 elements is always a challenge. But yeah, they do uplift each other. I think they definitely are louder together than they would have been everyone separate on their own. And that's also due to, as soon as you combine them, it's not just throwing flavors together. In the end, the whole dynamic and kinetics of the fermentation time and temperature changes, because now there's different sugars from each of them that combine. So you're actually really creating a new variety by combining the grapes together instead of just blending the wine together, because your fermentation is totally different than it would have been for each one of them separately. And it helps to go bone dry. I mean, each of these three, if I would have fermented them on their own, they will probably be stuck with a little bit of RS. But together they fill each other out with a very smooth, long, slow fermentation, and
That's
it goes
interesting.
bone dry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because it's got that real kind of Iberian dryness to it.
Yeah.
I really like.
That's just above 1 gram sugar. So
And just, I mean, there's a bit of texture there, but nothing overwhelming that overwhelms the fruit or the finish.
yeah, no, it has to be just enough there to keep the wine. It's almost for me the texture. While you see with the common thread with all my white wines, I do some cold soaking with the skins. It just cements the flavour so much longer on the palate, and in the end, that's what I enjoy with the wine. After I've swallowed it, it needs to stay there for as long as possible. And if you can find the balance between doing that without hiding the fruit or obscuring the fruit, then I think that's a fine line to work with.
I notice now that if you include your other wines that aren't here, the Atlanticas, the Nomadis, and the Senor Telos,
Yeah.
so obviously all the reds come from the lower Helderberg,
Yes.
the Sinai Hill, but some of the whites you're getting in from elsewhere, so Voor-Paardeberg and
Yeah.
Clarke. Is that a reflection on that there's just more reds planted in the Helderberg, or is that white variety, apart from Chenin, white varieties aren't really suited to the Helderberg, or
Yeah.
is it a bit of both? I mean, obviously you can't pick that is what isn't there,
Yeah.
but maybe what is there you don't think's high quality enough. Perhaps I'm not sure which one it is, or if it's both.
No, it's a valid question. I mean, for me, remember, wanted to working a lot with Grenache Blanc. There isn't any in the Helderberg, and I really wanted to work with Grenache Blanc, but more specifically from the Clarke. A big part of me grew up there as well, but in the end, there wasn't really any Grenache Blanc I could find up there until that stage. I was looking for the best quality Grenache Blanc I could get from a region that's also on granite. Choosing Grenache Blanc for me is also important because I want clean skins. As with all my white wines, you can't just pick any vineyard because I'm going to do some cold soaking. It has to be a region that's exposed to a little bit of wind, or actually has a poor soil that has a little bit of an more open canopy than it is sort of on a dark soil close to a riverbank, for instance. So it's not like Grenache Blanc is planted on any farm. You can just knock on a farmer's door to find Grenache Blanc. But so I first started to work with Grenache Blanc by Willie in the Voor-Paardeberg, but I was quite a tough client to him because I was very specific about where I want my Grenache Blanc on his farm.
That's unlike you. I'm really surprised.
So he at first he laughed at it, but eventually allowed me to place a demarcation there on a specific portion where the sand was heaping up, because the leaves definitely looked to me different than the rest of the Grenache Blanc on his farm. And I was happy, and I started with that Grenache Blanc 2017 first vintage, and for me that turned out an amazing dry white wine as well. That Grenache Blanc, I made like 2 barrels of it back then, but it turned out very well. I was very surprised and very happy with it, and I knew I still wanted to work with a still wine, but my focus was on getting Scions of Sinai with the Helderberg vineyards on board and growing, and I need a real special Grenache Blanc vineyard to have a unique character to it, where the one in the Voor-Paardeberg is perfect to use with Senor Telos. In the end, that works well with the blend with the Chenin from the Helderberg, but the Gramadulas and the Karoo just came on board, and I knew that's the right one to use under this label. So that's the only whites that I go get outside is actually Grenache Blanc, because we don't have that in Helderberg, and I don't think Grenache Blanc will really do well there. It's too windy and maybe a bit too rainy.
And apart from Chenin, is there anything else in the Helderberg that sort of interests you, or in white varieties?
White varieties. Now I think Chenin Blanc is doing very well. Chardonnay up on the mountain, yes, in the Helderberg, but here by me in the coastal area on decomposed granite, we all know, we're not going to change the winning recipe. Chenin loves decomposed granite, and I think it does well in that area. So not really to look for new weapons if we can improve the use of our own weapons.
Can you just repeat the varieties in this blend?
This is Chenin Blanc, Grenache Blanc, and Roussanne. So roughly a third of each. Yeah, and just a touch less Roussanne than the other two.